Section 36 of Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 1. Section 36. Selected Poems by Thomas Bailey Aldrich. Thomas Bailey Aldrich, 1836 to 1907. A poet in verse often becomes a poet in prose also, in composing novels. Although the novelist may not, and in general does not, possess the faculty of writing poems. The poet-novelist is apt to put into his prose a good deal of the same charm and the same picturesque choice of phrase and image that characterize his verse, while it does not follow that the novelist who at times writes verse, like George Eliot, for example, succeeds in giving a distinctly poetic quality to prose, or even wishes to do so. Among authors who have displayed peculiar power, and won fame in the dual capacity of poet and of prose, romancer or novelist, Sir Walter Scott and Victor Hugo no doubt stand preeminent; and in American literature, Edgar Allan Poe and Oliver Wendell Holmes very strikingly combine these two functions. Another American author who has gained a distinguished position both as a poet and as a writer of prose fiction and essays is Thomas Bailey Aldrich. It is upon his work in the form of verse, perhaps, that Aldrich's chief renown is based, but some of his short stories in especial have contributed much to his popularity, no less than to his repute as a delicate and polished artificer in words. A New Englander, he has infused into some of his poems the true atmosphere of New England, and has given the same light and color of home to his prose, while imparting to his productions in both kinds a delightful tinge of the foreign and remote. In addition to his capacities as a poet and romancer, he is a wit and humorist of sparkling quality. In reading his books one seems also to inhale the perfumes of Arabia and the farther East, blended with the salt sea breeze and the pine-scented air of his native state, New Hampshire. He was born in the old seaside town of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, November 11, 1836, but moved to New York City in 1854 at the age of 17. There he remained until 1866, beginning his work quite early, forming his literary character by reading and observation, by the writing of poems, and by practice and experience of writing prose sketches and articles for journals and periodicals. During this period he entered into associations with the poets Stedman, Stoddard, and Bayard Taylor, and was more or less in touch with the group that included Walt Whitman, Fitz James O'Brien, and William Winter. Removing to Boston in January, 1866, he became the editor of Every Saturday, and remained in that post until 1874, when he resigned. In 1875 he made a long tour in Europe, plucking the first fruits of foreign travel, which were succeeded by many rich and dainty gatherings from the same source in later years. In the intervals of these wanderings he lived in Boston and Cambridge, occupying for a time James Russell Lowell's historic house of Elmwood in the semi-rural university city, and then established a pretty country house at Ponkapog, a few miles west of Boston. This last suggested the title for a charming book of travel papers, From Ponkapog to Pesth. In 1881 he was appointed editor of the Atlantic Monthly, and continued to direct that famous magazine for 9 years, frequently making short trips to Europe, extending his tours as far as the heart of Russia, and gathering fresh materials for essay or song. Much of his time since giving up the Atlantic editorship has been passed in voyaging, and in 1894 5 he made a journey round the world. From the beginning he struck with quiet certainty the vein that was his by nature in poetry, and this has broadened almost continually, yielding richer results, which have been worked out with an increasing refinement of skill. His predilection is for the picturesque, for romance combined with simplicity, purity, and tenderness of feeling, touched by fancy, and by occasional lights of humor so reserved and dainty that they never disturb the pictorial harmony. The capacity for unaffected utterance of feeling on matters common to humanity reached a climax in the poem of Baby Bell, which by its sympathetic and delicate description of a child's advent and death gave the author a claim to the affection of a wide circle, and this remained for a long time probably the best known among his poems. Friar Jerome's beautiful book is another of the early favorites. Spring in New England has since come to hold high rank both for its vivid and graceful description of the season, for its tender fervor of patriotism, and for its sentiment of reconciliation between North and South. The lines on Piscataqua River remain one of the best illustrations of boyhood memories, and have something of Whittier's homely truth. In his longer narrative pieces, Judith and Wyndham Towers, cast in the mold of blank verse idylls, Mr. Aldrich does not seem so much himself as in many of his briefer flights. An instinctive dramatic tendency finds outlet in Pauline Paulovna and Mercedes, the latter of which, a two-act piece in prose, has found representation in the theatre. Yet in these also he is less eminently successful than in his lyrics and society verse. No American poet has wrought his stanzas with greater faithfulness to an exacting standard of craftsmanship than Mr. Aldrich, or has known better when to leave a line loosely cast, and when to reinforce it with correction or with a syllable that might seem to an ear less true redundant. This gives to his most carefully chiselled productions an air of spontaneous ease, and has made him eminent as a sonneteer. His sonnet on Sleep is one of the finest in the language. The conciseness and concentrated aptness of his expression, also, together with the faculty of bringing into conjunction subtly contrasted thoughts, images, or feelings, has issued happily in short concentrated pieces like An Untimely Thought, Destiny, and Identity, and in a number of pointed and effective quatrains. Without overmastering purpose outside of art itself, his is the poetry of luxury rather than of deep passion or conviction, yet with the freshness of bud and tint in springtime, it still always relates itself effectively to human experience. The author's specially American quality also, though not dominant, comes out clearly in Unguarded Gates, and with a differing tone in the plaintive Indian legend of Miantowana. If we perceive in his verse a kinship with the dainty ideals of Théophile Gautier and Alfred de Musset, this does not obscure his originality or his individual charm, and the same thing may be said with regard to his prose. The first of his short fictions that made a decided mark was Marjorie Doll. The fame which it gained in its separate field was as swift and widespread as that of Hawthorne's The Gentle Boy, or Bret Harte's Luck of Roaring Camp. It is a bright and half pathetic little parody on human life and affection, or perhaps we should call it a parable, symbolizing the power which imagination wields over real life, even in supposedly unimaginative people. The covert smile which it involves at the importance of human emotions may be traced to a certain extent in some of Mr. Aldrich's longer and more serious works of fiction, his three novels, Prudence Palfrey, The Queen of Sheba, and The Stillwater Tragedy. The story of a bad boy, frankly but quietly humorous in its record of the pranks and vicissitudes of a healthy average lad, with the scene of the story localized at Old Portsmouth, under the name of Rivermouth. A less ambitious work, still holds a secure place in the affections of many mature as well as young readers. Besides these books, Mr. Aldrich has published a collection of short descriptive, reminiscent, and half-historic papers on Portsmouth, an old town by the sea, with a second volume of short stories entitled Two Bites at a Cherry. The character drawing in his fiction is clear-cut and effective, often sympathetic, and nearly always suffused with an agreeable coloring of humor. There are notes of pathos, too, in some of his tales, and it is the blending of these qualities, through the medium of a lucid and delightful style, that defines his pleasing quality in prose. Destiny. 3 roses, wan as moonlight, and weighed down each with its loveliness as with a crown, drooped in a florist's window in a town. The first a lover bought. It lay at rest like flower on flower that night on Beauty's breast. The second rose, as virginal and fair, shrunk in the tangles of a harlot's hair. The third, a widow with new grief made wild, shut in the icy palm of her dead child. Identity. Somewhere, in desolate wind-swept space, in twilight land, in no man's land, 2 hurrying shapes met face to face, and bade each other stand. "And who are you?" cried one, agape, shuddering in the gloaming light. "I know not," said the second shape, "I only died last night." Prescience. The new moon hung in the sky, the sun was low in the west, And my betrothed and I in the churchyard paused to rest, Happy maiden and lover, dreaming the old dream over. The light winds wandered by, and robins chirped from the nest, And lo! in the meadow sweet was the grave of a little child, With a crumbling stone at the feet, and the ivy running wild, Tangled ivy and clover folding it over and over. Close to my sweetheart's feet was the little mound uppiled. Stricken with nameless fears, she shrank and clung to me, And her eyes were filled with tears for a sorrow I did not see. Lightly the winds were blowing, softly her tears were flowing, Tears for the unknown years and a sorrow that was to be. Alec Yeaton's Son. Gloucester, August, 1720. The wind it wailed, the wind it moaned, And the whitecaps flecked the sea, And I would to God, the skipper groaned, I had not my boy with me. Snug in the stern sheets little John laughed as the scud swept by, But the skipper's sunburnt cheek grew wan as he watched the wicked sky. Would he were at his mother's side! And the skipper's eyes were dim. Good Lord in heaven, if ill betide, what would become of him? For me, my muscles are as steel, for me, let hap what may, I might make shift upon the keel until the break of day. But he is so weak and small, so young, scarce learned to stand. O pitying Father of us all, I trust him in thy hand. For thou who markest from on high a sparrow's fall, each one, Surely, O Lord, thou'lt have an eye on Alec Yeaton's son. Then, helm hard port, right straight he sailed Towards the headland light. The wind it moaned, the wind it wailed, And black, black fell the night. Then burst a storm to make one quail, Though housed from winds and waves. They who could tell about that gale Must rise from watery graves. Sudden it came, as sudden went, Ere half the night was sped. The winds were hushed, the waves were spent, And the stars shone overhead. Now, as the morning mist grew thin, The folk on Gloucester shore Saw a little figure floating in, Secure on a broken oar. Up rose the cry, "A wreck! a wreck! Pull, mates, and waste no breath!" They knew it, though 'twas but a speck Upon the edge of death. Long did they marvel in the town At God his strange decree, That let the stalwart skipper drown, And the little child go free. Memory. My mind lets go 1,000 things, Like dates of wars and deaths of kings, And yet recalls the very hour 'Twas noon by yonder village tower, And on the last blue noon in May The wind came briskly up this way, Crisping the brook beside the road, Then, pausing here, set down its load Of pine scents, and shook listlessly 2 petals from that wild rose tree. Tennyson, 1890. I. Shakespeare and Milton. What third blazoned name Shall lips of after ages link to these? His, who beside the wild encircling seas Was England's voice, her voice with one acclaim For 80 years, whose word of praise was fame, Whose scorn gave pause to man's iniquities. II. What strain was his in that Crimean war, A bugle call in battle, a low breath Plaintive and sweet above the fields of death. So year by year the music rolled afar, From Euxine wastes to flowery Kandahar, Bearing the laurel or the cypress wreath. III. Others shall have their little space of time, Their proper niche and bust, then fade away Into the darkness, poets of a day. But thou, O builder of enduring rhyme, Thou shalt not pass. Thy fame in every clime On earth shall live, where Saxon speech has sway. IV. Waft me this verse across the winter sea, Through light and dark, through mist and blinding sleet, O winter winds, and lay it at his feet. Though the poor gift betray my poverty, At his feet lay it, It may chance that he will find no gift where reverence is unmeet. Sweetheart, sigh no more. It was with doubt and trembling I whispered in her ear. Go, take her answer, bird on bough, that all the world may hear. Sweetheart, sigh no more. Sing it, tawny throat upon the wayside tree, how fair she is, how true she is, how dear she is to me. Sweetheart, sigh no more. Sing it, and through the summer long the winds among the clover tops and brooks, for all their silvery stops, shall envy you the song. Sweetheart, sigh no more. Broken music. A note. All out of tune in this world's instrument. Amy Levy. I know not in what fashion she was made, nor what her voice was when she used to speak, nor if the silken lashes threw a shade on wan or rosy cheek. I pictured her with sorrowful, vague eyes, illumed with such strange gleams of inner light as linger in the drift of London skies ere twilight turns to night. I know not. I conjecture. 'Twas a girl that with her own most gentle desperate hand from out God's mystic setting plucked life's pearl. 'Tis hard to understand. So precious life is! Even to the old the hours are as miser's coins, and she, within her hands lay youth's unminted gold and all felicity. The winged impetuous spirit, the white flame that was her soul once, whither has it flown? Above her brow gray lichens blot her name upon the carven stone. This is her book of verses, wren-like notes, shy franknesses, blind gropings, haunting fears. At times across the chords abruptly floats a mist of passionate tears. A fragile lyre too tensely keyed and strung, a broken music, weirdly incomplete. Here a proud mind, self-baffled and self-stung, lies coiled in dark defeat. Elmwood, in memory of James Russell Lowell. Here in the twilight, at the well-known gate, I linger, with no heart to enter more. Among the elm tops the autumnal air murmurs, and spectral in the fading light a solitary heron wings its way southward. Save this, no sound or touch of life. Dark is the window where the scholar's lamp was used to catch a pallor from the dawn. Yet I must needs a little linger here. Each shrub and tree is eloquent of him, for tongueless things in silence have their speech. This is the path familiar to his foot, from infancy to manhood and old age. For in a chamber of that ancient house his eyes first opened on the mystery of life, and all the splendor of the world. Here as a child, in loving, curious way, he watched the bluebirds coming, learned the date of hyacinth and goldenrod, and made friends of those little red men of the elms, and slyly added to their winter store of hazelnuts. No harmless thing that breathed, footed or winged, but knew him for a friend. The gilded butterfly was not afraid to trust its gold to that so gentle hand. The bluebird fled not from the pendant spray. Oh, happy childhood ringed with fortunate stars! What dreams were his in this enchanted sphere, what intuitions of high destiny! The honey bees of Hybla touched his lips in that old New World garden, unawares. So in her arms did Mother Nature fold her poet, whispering what of wild and sweet into his ears? The state affairs of birds, the lore of dawn and sunset, what the wind said in the tree tops. Fine, unfathomed things henceforth to turn to music in his brain. A various music, now like notes of flutes, and now like blasts of trumpets blown in wars. Later he paced this leafy Academe a student, drinking from Greek chalices the ripened vintage of the antique world. And here to him came love, and love's dear loss. Here honors came, the deep applause of men, touched to the heart by some swift winged word, that from his own full heart took eager flight. Some strain of piercing sweetness or rebuke, for underneath his gentle nature flamed a noble scorn for all ignoble deed, himself a bondman till all men were free. Thus passed his manhood. Then to other lands he strayed, a stainless figure among courts, beside the Manzanares and the Thames, whence, after too long exile, he returned with fresher laurel, but sedater step, and eye more serious, fain to breathe the air where through the Cambridge marshes the blue Charles uncoils its length and stretches to the sea, stream dear to him, at every curve a shrine for pilgrim memory. Again he watched his loved syringa whitening by the door, and knew the catbird's welcome. In his walks smiled on his tawny kinsman of the elms stealing his nuts, and in the ruined year sat at his widowed hearthside with bent brows, leonine, frosty with the breath of time, and listened to the crooning of the wind in the wide elmwood chimneys, as of old. And then the afterglow has faded from the elms, and in the denser darkness of the boughs, from time to time, the firefly's tiny lamp sparkles. How often, in still summer dusks, he paused to note that transient phantom spark flash on the air, a light that outlasts him. The night grows chill, as if it felt a breath, blown from that frozen city where he lies. All things turn strange. The leaf that rustles here has more than autumn's mournfulness. The place is heavy with his absence. Like fixed eyes, whence the dear light of sense and thought has fled, the vacant windows stare across the lawn. The wise, sweet spirit that informed it all is otherwhere. The house itself is dead. O autumn wind among the sombre pines, breathe you his dirge, but be it sweet or low. With deep refrains and murmurs of the sea, like to his verse the art is yours alone. His once you taught him, now no voice but yours. Tender and low, O wind among the pines, I would, were mine a lyre of richer strings, in soft Sicilian accents wrap his name. Sea longings. The first world sound that fell upon my ear was that of the great winds along the coast, crushing the deep sea beryl on the rocks, the distant breakers' sullen cannonade. Against the spires and gables of the town the white fog drifted, catching here and there at overleaning cornice or peaked roof, and hung, weird gonfalons. The garden walks were choked with leaves, and on their ragged biers lay dead the sweets of summer, damask rose, clove pink, old-fashioned, loved New England flowers. Only keen salt sea odors filled the air. Sea sounds, sea odors, these were all my world. Hence is it that life languishes with me inland. The valleys stifle me with gloom and pent-up prospect. In their narrow bound imagination flutters futile wings. Vainly I seek the sloping pearl-white sand, and the mirage's phantom citadels, miraculous a moment seen, then gone. Among the mountains I am ill at ease, missing the stretched horizon's level line, and the illimitable restless blue. The crag-torn sky is not the sky I love, but one unbroken sapphire spanning all. And nobler than the branches of a pine aslant upon a precipice's edge are the strained spars of some great battle-ship ploughing across the sunset. No bird's lilt so takes me as the whistling of the gale among the shrouds. My cradle-song was this: strange, inarticulate sorrows of the sea, blithe rhythms upgathered from the siren's caves. Perchance of earthly voices the last voice that shall an instant my freed spirit stay on this world's verge, will be some message blown over the dim salt lands that fringe the coast at dusk, or when the tranced midnight droops with weight of stars, or haply just as dawn, illumining the sullen purple wave, turns the gray pools and willow stems to gold. A shadow of the night. Close on the edge of a midsummer's dawn, in troubled dreams I went from land to land, each seven-colored like the rainbow's arc, regions where never fancy's foot had trod till then. Yet all the strangeness seemed not strange, at which I wondered, reasoning in my dream with twofold sense, well knowing that I slept. At last I came to this our cloud hung earth, and somewhere by the sea shore was a grave, a woman's grave, new made, and heaped with flowers, and near it stood an ancient holy man, that fain would comfort me, who sorrowed not for this unknown dead woman at my feet. But I, because his sacred office held my reverence, listened, and 'twas thus he spake: "When next thou comest, thou shalt find her still in all the rare perfection that she was. Thou shalt have gentle greeting of thy love; her eyelids will have turned to violets, her bosom to white lilies, and her breath to roses. What is lovely never dies, but passes into other loveliness, star dust, or sea foam, flower, or winged air. If this befalls our poor unworthy flesh, think thee what destiny awaits the soul, what glorious vesture it shall wear at last." While yet he spoke, sea shore and grave and priest vanished, and faintly from a neighboring spire fell 5 slow, solemn strokes upon my ear. Then I awoke with a keen pain at my heart, a sense of swift unutterable loss, and through the darkness reached my hand to touch her cheek, soft pillowed on one restful palm, to be quite sure. OUTWARD BOUND. I leave behind me the elm-shadowed square and carven portals of the silent street, and wander on with listless, vagrant feet through seaward leading alleys, till the air smells of the sea, and straightway then the care slips from my heart, and life once more is sweet. At the lane's ending lie the white-winged fleet. O restless fancy, whither wouldst thou fare? Here are brave pinions that shall take thee far, gaunt hulks of Norway, ships of red Ceylon, slim-masted lovers of the blue Azores. 'Tis but an instant hence to Zanzibar, or to the regions of the midnight sun. Ionian isles are thine, and all the fairy shores. Reminiscence. Though I am native to this frozen zone, that half the twelvemonth torpid lies, or dead; though the cold azure arching overhead, and the Atlantic's never-ending moan, are mine by heritage, I must have known life otherwhere in epochs long since fled, for in my veins some orient blood is red, and through my thought are lotus blossoms blown. I do remember it was just at dusk, near a walled garden at the river's turn. 1,000 summers seem but yesterday. A Nubian girl, more sweet than courge musk, came to the water tank to fill her urn, and with the urn she bore my heart away. End of Section 36.